The largest fund that I ever worked on there was a $40 million fund. I helped manage a $20 million fund, a $25 million fund, and a $40 million fund. And so I also learned a lot about how to manage relatively small-sized venture funds. Now, those funds back in the 80s and early 90s, it was 22, 26, and 40 actually was the three fund sizes. You know, with inflation and other things at work, you know, maybe the equivalent today would be, you know, 50, 75, 100, or maybe 40, 60, 80. So, you know, they're not quite as small as it might sound, but nevertheless, we had to make a lot happen on a fairly small amount of money. And in order to get any real good diversification in a venture portfolio, you need to have at least 12 or 14, I think at least 12 or 14 investments. So if you're working on a $22 million fund and you got to make between 12 and 14 investments, you can do the math as well as I can. You can't put a lot of money into these companies. But at the same time, we were trying to do really early stage investing. We were trying to be the first venture capital investors in a deal, and then we had to, you know, go the entire length of the investment on maybe a couple $1 million. That's really hard to do, and the only way you can really do that successfully, and I could argue that we weren't really all that successful because we ended up getting diluted down pretty dramatically in a bunch of companies that I was involved in because we couldn't play in the follow-on rounds. But what you do is you make your initial investment of $500 or $600 or $700,000, and then you work like hell to get other people to write all the checks after that. And you're always looking to get an uptick in the next valuation, and you're always trying to figure out how to put as little money as possible in to maintain your ownership position. That's a very good discipline to learn. I think in many ways maybe the single most important discipline to learn in the venture capital business. Because what people tend to do in the venture business is they tend to try to solve problems with money. And most problems can't be solved with money. Most problems can be solved with better management, or better strategy, or better technology. But I don't think that you can buy yourself out of a bad investment. And so if you are, you know, sort of built into your DNA, you know, thinking about trying to squeeze as much value out of a small amount of capital as you can, that's a really good way, I think, to learn the venture capital business. So I worked there for 10 years. I left in 96. By the time I left, the internet was on its way, and the last 3 or 4 investments I made at Euclid were internet investments, and that was a real gift to me. You know, I think everybody in their career is going to have some number of opportunities that will be presented to you. I think somewhere between 5 and 10 really big opportunities that get presented to you over, you know, a 40-year career, and I think the whole key is recognizing them and jumping on them. And for me, that was a big one when the internet came along. You know, I never felt like we, or I in particular, had developed a domain expertise. One of the issues that we had at Euclid was that about half of what we did was medical investing, biotech, medical devices, and about half of what we did was IT, and that was split kind of between hardware and software. And you know, so now you're thinking, okay, so they're managing $22 million, 14 investments, and then on top of that, they were doing, you know, a few in 2 different categories in medical, 2 different categories in technology. It's a little nuts. And you know, one of the problems with that strategy is you don't really develop any domain expertise. You don't get really known for anything. And so we didn't really get known for anything. The internet came along, and you know, for you know, a small firm, we made a number of pretty interesting investments in '94 and '95, and I was able to bring in some, as we always had to do, as I was explaining earlier, other venture capital firms into these investments. And so I made a bunch of friends in the venture business. We had a couple of big wins early on with a couple of these investments. And so turns out that two of these firms, SoftBank and Chase, wanted to do a lot more internet investing and liked the deals I was bringing to them. And that's what ultimately led to me leaving and starting Flatiron Partners with SoftBank and Chase, each committing $75 million. And that's another interesting story in and of itself. So I had worked for 10 years of my career in a firm that, over the life of the time I was there, had raised 3 funds in a total of about 87-ish, whatever, $million. And then in the span of literally 2 or 3 months, my partner Jerry and I raised $150 million in two $75 million commitments. So again, right place, right time, with the right background, the right reputation, and sometimes you do catch lightning in a bottle. So that's sort of the story of the early part of my career, and I don't know that it makes a whole lot of sense to tell you the whole story. The quick summary of it is we started Flatiron in '96 and had a great run from '96 to 2000, and then along the way SoftBank ended up leaving as an investor in Flatiron, and Chase ended up picking up their piece. So Chase was the sole investor in Flatiron for 98, 99, 2000, and then Chase merged with JP Morgan, and then at the end of 2001, JP Morgan Chase concluded that they really didn't want to be doing internet investing in the style that we were doing it anymore, for a lot of good reasons, because it was not a particularly great time to be doing internet investing. And so we wound down that firm, although it still exists and I still manage it, but we stopped making new investments in the summer of 2000. And I guess one thing I would say about that experience is that we started that firm in 1996. 13 years later, I'm still managing a portfolio of like 5 companies. So the venture, and actually we'll go back to Euclid. I got a distribution check from Euclid Partners, I don't know, a couple months ago, a firm I hadn't been with since 1996. So venture business is a very long business to be in. You just can't decide one day that, I mean, you can, and people have decided that they don't really want to do this anymore, but if you are the named partner in a firm and you go out and you raise a bunch of money, you're basically committing to manage that money for at least 10 years. Most venture partnerships are 10-year partnerships, but in honesty, you're probably agreeing to manage it for like 15 years. That's my experience. So I'm still managing the Flatiron business. We still have a few portfolio companies, but by 2003, it started to not be a full-time proposition, and I teamed up with my partner Brad Burnham, and we raised Union Square Ventures. It took us a year to raise that fund. We started in the fall of 2003, and we ended up closing the fund in the fall of 2004. And now we've raised a second fund, and we finally have built the kind of firm that I really wanted to build back in 1996. I didn't really know how to build it in '96, and we did a lot of things right at Flatiron, but we did a lot of things wrong. And I think in Union Square Ventures, Brad and I have created a firm that built on a lot of what I learned at Euclid Partners back in the late '80s. I think that Brad and I, in some ways, are similar to the style that Milton and Bliss built back in the '70s, but also picked up a lot of tricks from things that Jerry and I did at Flatiron well, and taught ourselves a few new tricks too. And